So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Hiba, and thank you all. I want to thank you all again for coming, and I would like to thank again the speakers, all the speakers, especially those who came from far away, for making it to this very important conference. And since I was a PhD student, as Dr. Hiba said it, I was always hoping to see such an event on this topic in this region, and it's finally happening thanks to the ERF. My talk will all be about the time use of women in this region, and I will focus on Egypt as one of the very few countries who have time use available. And let me start by, I would like to say that, okay, if we assume identical preferences for men and women towards the quality of life variables, so if two individuals, a man and a woman, have the same resource constraints, so these two persons should have equal opportunities to be equally healthy, equally educated, but also they would maybe choose or probably choose to work equally, both in the marketplace and at home. But when we look at the marketplace, as it was said and repeated many times in the morning, the MENA region is not doing the same way as the other regions. So here, if you look at the women's deficit in the market, you can see that the red bar is much larger than the other regions. However, we can think that, okay, maybe in the developing countries, women are not doing enough in the market, but they might be doing other types of work that we don't necessarily take into account, and one of the types is the subsistence work. And this graph shows you the differences between men and women, and if you look at the orange bars, which represents the subsistence work, or what we call the unpaid family work, you can see that these shares for women are much larger than what they are for men. And if we think about marriage as the major determinant of women's employment decision, this figure or this graph is really one of my favorites because it shows you to what extent marriage determines all the decisions made by women regarding their employment. So just to make you understand this graph, the X bar or the X axis, it shows the years of marriage so we follow women from 5 years before they get married to 5 years after. And then we distinguish between the different employment sectors. So if you look at the highest curve, which represents or which shows the government work, you can see that women, if they used to work in the government before marriage, they just continue working in that sector with no problem at all. But if you look at the other line for the private formal wage work, so you can see clearly this drop when they get married. So it seems that women in this region, so this graph, I just want to specify that this is for Egypt, using the Egypt Labor Market Panel Survey of 2012. But we did the same for Jordan. We found very similar trends. So the idea here is that if a woman works in the private sector before she gets married, once she gets married, she knows in advance that she has to leave her job. And so she quits her job in advance because she knows that it's not going to work to be married with all the responsibilities that comes with, and to be working in that sector. So the problem is not working with being married, but the problem is in which sector you work. And this is very important to keep in mind. So the motivation of my talk is that, okay, there is low labor force participation that is mostly driven by demand-side factors, and that's what I'm going to mention later. But there is also, as Professor Floro has said it this morning, there is also this very serious bias in the division of labor within the family, within the household, that at least partly contributes to this gender gap. And that will be the outline of my talk. So I'll first show you some facts, some data on time use of women in the MENA region, taking Egypt as an example of that. And then I heard a lot of people talking about the culture and the happiness, and maybe women don't work, but they are happy about it. So what's the problem with that? So I was very interested to see whether really housewives feel happier or are happier compared to working women. And that's what I'm going to show you. And it will be, I mean, for me at least, it was a bit surprising. And finally, I will end my talk by just talking about, okay, what we need, what MENA women need. So before talking about the time use, just for those who are not familiar with it, usually we measure time use asking individuals very simple questions, like on average, how many hours per week do you spend on paid work, but also how many hours per week you spend on taking care of your children, taking care of the elderly, and also taking care of the household. And unfortunately, today I will not be able to make any comparisons between men and women, because even if I consider it as a huge progress that thanks to the ERF and Turagi that we have this time use data, but still this time use data is only available for women and for children, not for men. So I'll only be able, not as far as I know. So for now I'll be making only evidence for women, but I'll not compare it to men. So again, as Professor Floro said it, so we have to take into account this care economy, and there is a lot of evidence from all the countries, not only developing, but also developed countries, that women in total, they're actually doing much more than men. Because if you add up the market work, if they work, plus all the other activities that are invisible, you will find that they actually work much more than men. So why we keep saying that women don't work? So if you look at this graph, which shows comparisons between employed and non-employed women, and then you have their time use. So the green bars are the market work, and they are only available if they are unemployed. But the interesting part of it is that if you look at the orange bars, which represent the housework or the hours they spend on housework, you can see that whether they are employed or not, they are doing this share of job. And interestingly enough, the employed women, they even do more at home, which personally, I was very surprised to see that. And even if you do that by levels of education, thinking that maybe, I don't know, things will be different by education, but again, whether you work or not, whether you're educated or not, you do this part of the home-based work anyway. And these two graphs are all about women. So these are the same women in 2 points in time. The first point in time is 1998, where all the women were single. And then I follow these women, but by the time I create two different groups. So those who get married at some point between 1998 and 2006, and the other group are those who remain single for the whole period. And if you look at the black bars, so the graph up is about the hours spent in the market work, and the other graph is about the hours spent in domestic work. And if you look at the black bar, so they do, the women who get married, when they do this transition into marriage, they work less in the market necessarily just because of marriage, and they work much more at home compared to their single counterparts. And then, as I told you, I said, okay, so maybe they do that because they are happy about it. They don't want to work. They're just lazy or something. They are happy with it. But this graph is from the Word Value Survey, and there is a question asking whether being a housewife is just as fulfilling as working for pay. And this is only a sample of women aged between 15 and 64, so working age women. And as you can see, I mean, so if you compare MENA to the non-MENA, you can see that they are happier about being a housewife. But if you do the same thing, but you take into account their employment status, and you look at their happiness. So as you can see, housewives are not necessarily happier compared to full-time workers or part-time workers. Actually, for some countries, as I'm going to show you in a second, it's the other way around. So this is taking a sample, or some countries, some MENA countries, and this shows you only among the very happy group. So those who feel the happiest, are they unemployed, the unemployed, the housewives, the part-time, or the full-time? And surprisingly enough, I found that the part-time workers are the happiest, or represents the largest share of this very happy group. And this is, so if you look at the black bar in Yemen, in Turkey, in Jordan, in Palestine, which was very surprising. So looking only at this graph, you can see clearly that women don't necessarily want to stay at home. They want to work, but they need a job that is convenient and that is taking into account their household responsibilities, right? So if you give them these part-time jobs, this will push them to go in the labor market, and they will feel happier in their life in general. And of course, you can play with the word value surveys as much as you want. You have other questions on life satisfaction, and I tried those, and it's again the same thing. So just to sum up all the ideas from this presentation. So home-based work represents an important component of women's use in this region, and this amount of time that they spend on this type of work is not gonna disappear, because they have to do it anyway, not by choice, but because there is no one else to do it. And just to tell you something Gragi told me maybe 5 years ago, when I was still a PhD student, when I asked him why we don't have the same data for men, and he told me simply because we tried it one time and they did not accept to answer questions. So they felt really bad that we asked them how many hours you spend cooking, how many hours you spend this or that. So they felt bad about it. So this shows you to what extent it's really, so the culture, maybe it plays an important role. So this time they spent in the household or at home is not gonna be reduced from one day into another, and we have to deal with it, and we still have to find a solution to make these women, especially married women, work more in the labor market. We also found evidence that the number of hours they spend on home-based work is decreasing over time. So if you allow me to go back very quickly to this graph. So here, if you compare the 2006 to the 2012, you can see that the orange bar is decreasing. So that doesn't mean that the man is helping or something, but there are all the time use devices and everything that make them work less at home automatically, which is a good thing. The third message is that staying at home does not necessarily make them happier. So I'm not sure it's culture, because if it was purely cultural, they will be maybe happier about it. And there is also evidence or data shows that unemployment rates for women are rapidly increasing, which again demonstrates that those women do want to work in the market, but they just can't. So now, my last point, I'm thinking with you, and maybe you will help me with that, but so what MENA women need? So, of course, as I started, the problem is mostly a demand-side issue problem. So maybe more flexible arrangements for women from the employer's side, if they understand that they have this double burden issue and all the responsibilities that they have to take care about at home, that will make women feel more accepted in the labor market. Women, especially the most educated and the married ones, they need, as I told you, maybe more part-time jobs. As we found them, so we found that those women are the happiest, actually. So just create more part-time jobs, shorter working hours, like the public sector. So remember that graph, that the government employment is actually perfect for women. Job sharing. So there is a lot of arrangements like that maybe would encourage women to work more in the market. So I'm not necessarily saying that we need to push women into the workforce to make them work, you know, but I'm just saying that we need to create a system that does not discriminate against them just by giving them the opportunities or the jobs that they need. Of course, we need economic growth, we need jobs for all, and this would automatically create jobs for women. We need to continue increasing education attainment levels, because this will automatically, again, lead to delays, delaying the marriage timing, and will keep them for a longer while in the labor market. And this final idea that I think is very far from what we plan to do, at least for the next 10, 20 years in our region, which is taking into account this care economy in our GDPs. Maybe I'm a bit pessimistic, but I hope that policymakers will prove me the other way. Thank you very much.